They called him a hero, the man who walked through the flames and came out alive. But when he opened his eyes in the hospital, Captain Mark Reynolds realized the fire hadn't died. It had only moved inside him. Before we begin, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and tell us in the comments where you're listening from. Every week, we share stories that happen behind hospital walls, where life, truth, and silence often collide. The ICU was quiet that night. Only the slow rhythm of the heart monitor broke the silence, a metronome counting what was left of him. Mark's body was a map of burns and bruises. His lungs fought for every breath, machines hissing beside him, feeding air into what the fire had stolen. It had been 48 hours since the explosion. The warehouse on Eastbrook Avenue was gone, and with it, his partner, Lieutenant Paul Henderson. They had gone in together, like they always did. But only one came out. Doctor. Ethan Clark watched the numbers flicker on the monitor. He was the attending trauma physician, a man known for precision and distance, someone who believed the hardest part of medicine wasn't saving a life. It was deciding which truths to keep from the living. The city had already made its decision. The news headlines called Mark a hero. Fire captain saves dozens in chemical blast. Photos showed his face wrapped in gauze, medals already being printed before his eyes had even opened. But inside the hospital, Ethan saw things differently. The burns on Mark's arms didn't match the official report. The pattern suggested a flashpoint far closer than expected. Too close for survival unless he'd known it was coming. In the dim light of the room, Mark's eyelids fluttered. His throat was raw, voice barely a whisper. Ethan leaned in. Captain Reynolds, you're safe now. You're at St. David's Hospital. Mark's lips moved, words escaping like broken air. Paul, it wasn't supposed to happen. Ethan frowned. What wasn't supposed to happen? But Mark was already gone again, drifting back into the dark. Later that night in the staff lounge, Ethan flipped through the paramedics' field notes. The initial blast originated near the north wall, exactly where the two men had entered. But the fire path didn't make sense. It moved outward, as if ignited from the inside. He rubbed his eyes, exhausted. Why were they even in there? He muttered. Outside the hospital, reporters swarmed the gates. Inside, fluorescent lights buzzed softly. Nurses moved like ghosts, adjusting IV drips, checking monitors, whispering the small mercies that keep people alive. At 3:17 a.m., the steady rhythm of the ECG faltered. Ethan rushed back to the room. Mark was trembling, sweat mixing with antiseptic. Easy, Ethan said. You're safe. But the word safe meant nothing here. Not anymore. In his delirium, Mark kept murmuring the same phrase. He promised me no one would get hurt. Ethan didn't know what that meant yet, but he would. Hours later, when the firefighters from Station 12 arrived to visit their captain, they placed his charred helmet beside the bed. One of them, eyes red from smoke and grief, whispered, "You did good, Cap. Paul would be proud." Mark's fingers twitched against the blanket. His pulse rose. He turned his head slightly, lips moving again. This time silent, like a prayer or a confession. Ethan stayed behind when everyone left. He looked at the man sleeping before him, then at the helmet on the table. Something about the melted visor caught his attention, a black stain that smelled faintly of gasoline. He glanced at the chart, then back at Mark. A thought crossed his mind, one he didn't want to say aloud. "Who were you saving that night, Captain?" he whispered. The monitor beeped softly in reply. The sound was steady, alive, but heavy with the kind of truth that burns slower than any fire. And somewhere between those steady beeps, the doctor understood. This wasn't the story of a hero who survived the flames. It was the story of a man who was still inside them. Morning came like a faded photograph, colourless, cold, too bright for the kind of night the hospital had lived through. The rain outside had stopped, but the smell of smoke still clung to the fabric of the trauma ward, as if the fire itself refused to let go of the man lying in room 314. Captain Mark Reynolds opened his eyes to the sound of distant footsteps and the faint hum of fluorescent lights. Every breath hurt. Every movement reminded him that he was still alive when someone else wasn't. "Welcome back," said a nurse, her voice gentle. You've been through quite a storm. He didn't answer. He didn't have to. The storm wasn't over. It was sitting right there beside him. Dr. Ethan Clark entered with his tablet, his white coat half open, dark circles under his eyes. Captain Reynolds, he said, tone calm but probing. How are you feeling? Mark blinked, confused. His throat burned when he tried to speak. Paul? Ethan hesitated. He didn't make it. Mark turned his head away. The room fell silent except for the slow mechanical breath of the ventilator. After a long pause, Ethan said quietly, Do you remember what happened that night? Mark's brow furrowed. Fire. Explosion. His voice cracked. We went in. The roof gave out. That's what the report says, Ethan replied carefully. But there's something unusual about the burn patterns. Mark's eyes flickered. Unusual how? The point of ignition, Ethan said. It was close to where you and Paul entered. Mark said nothing. His pulse began to climb, the monitor betraying the emotion he was trying to hide. Ethan noticed. Don't worry, he said. It's not an interrogation. I just want to understand what happened. But the silence that followed said more than any explanation could. That afternoon, 2 detectives arrived at St. David's. One wore a leather jacket and the tired expression of someone who'd seen too many fires. Detective Harris asked to see the patient. Ethan refused. He's not stable. Still, the question lingered in the air long after they left. Why would the fire department's insurance investigator be working alongside homicide? Later, while checking Mark's dressings, Ethan noticed something odd. The residue on his boots wasn't soot. It was oily, almost metallic. He leaned closer. The smell, unmistakable. Gasoline. Why would there be accelerant on your boots before the fire even started? He whispered, half to himself. Mark's eyes opened. What did you say? Ethan froze. Nothing. Just talking to myself. Mark studied him, suspicion and exhaustion blending into something almost desperate. Doctor, he said, voice hoarse, don't believe everything you read in those reports. The doctor met his gaze. Then help me understand them. But Mark turned away again, his expression closing like a door. There's nothing to understand. It was an accident. That night, Ethan stood in the empty hallway, watching the reflection of red emergency lights pulse faintly against the polished floor. Somewhere down the corridor, a nurse laughed softly. Life went on. But for the man in room 314, time had stopped. Inside the room, Mark stared at the ceiling, sweat beading on his forehead. Each blink brought back fragments he didn't want to see. Paul arguing on the radio. The smell of gasoline. A flicker of panic. And then the roar, white, violent, final. He clenched his fists. I tried to stop you, he whispered to the dark, voice cracking. God knows I tried. In the observation window, Ethan watched him for a long moment before turning away. He didn't know the full story yet, but something told him this wasn't about heroism or fire. It was about guilt. And whatever truth had survived, the flames was about to burn again. As the monitors hummed softly, a faint knock echoed at the nurse's station. A young paramedic had come to drop off the rest of the burned equipment recovered from the scene. Ethan signed the form absently, until his eyes caught a small metal tag among the melted gear. Henderson, Captain's locker. He stared at it for a moment, then looked back toward room 314. The fire hadn't started where they said it did. It started where trust ended, and that was something no medical report could ever explain. Days passed, and the rhythm of the hospital became its own kind of heartbeat. The hiss of oxygen, the squeak of wheels, the whisper of nurses trading shifts at dawn. Captain Mark Reynolds sat by the window now, pale and motionless, watching the world move on without him. His burns were healing, but his silence was not. Dr. Ethan Clark kept his distance at first, studying the case through lab reports and chart notes. Every file read the same. Stable condition, limited recall, prognosis fair. But the data didn't capture what Ethan saw when he looked at the man. A body alive, but a soul still burning. Rehabilitation had begun. Physical therapy in slow, painful increments. The hospital corridors echoed with the sound of his limp, the cane tapping like a slow metronome against tile floors. The other patients saw a hero. The nurses saw resilience. Ethan saw something else. Avoidance. One afternoon during a breathing test, Mark coughed violently. "You're pushing too hard," Ethan warned. "I need to get back," Mark said between gasps. "My crew needs me." "You can't save anyone until you stop pretending you're fine," Ethan replied, his tone more human than clinical. Mark looked at him, eyes bloodshot. "Pretending is all I've got left, Doc." That night, a visitor arrived. Claire Henderson, widow of Mark's partner. She walked into the hospital with flowers and exhaustion, her wedding ring still on, her shoulders trembling beneath a black coat. "Captain Reynolds," she said softly, taking his hand. "Paul would have wanted me to thank you." Mark froze. Don't thank me." Her eyes filled with tears. "You saved him so many times before. I know you tried." The monitors beeped softly between them. The sterile room suddenly too small for so much grief. Claire placed the flowers on the nightstand and whispered, "He talked about you all the time. Said you were the only one he trusted." Mark turned his face away. He shouldn't have. When she left, the silence that followed was unbearable. He sat in the dim light, staring at the flowers, their scent mixing with antiseptic and regret. His hands trembled. The memory of Paul's last words echoed in his head. Desperate, terrified. "It's just one fire, Mark, just this once. No one will get hurt." But people always got hurt, especially the ones who believed in you. Ethan found him later that night, sitting awake. The monitors still attached, but his eyes far away. "You didn't sleep," Ethan said. "Didn't want to," Mark replied. "You keep talking in your sleep, saying his name." Mark forced a weak smile. "Guess he's not done with me." Ethan sat beside him. "Tell me about that night." Mark hesitated. What difference would it make? "Maybe none," Ethan said. "Maybe all of it." Mark closed his eyes. He said it would be easy money. The warehouse was insured. The owner's gone bankrupt. He swore it was just property. I told him no. But when I saw the gas cans, I realized it was too late. Ethan said nothing, his jaw tight. Mark's voice cracked. He didn't want to die. He just wanted to survive. We both did. A long silence stretched between them. The hum of fluorescent lights filled the room. Finally, Ethan spoke quietly. "And the report?" "I wrote what they needed to read," Mark admitted. "A hero story. No scandal. No shame. Claire gets the insurance. Everyone sleeps better at night." Ethan stood there, heart pounding. "Except you." Mark looked up. "Yeah, except me." Later, Ethan walked out into the empty hallway, the weight of the confession heavy on his chest. Through the glass of the ICU wing, he watched the city lights blink in the distance. Tiny fires that never went out. He thought about truth, about the lines doctors and firefighters both crossed in the name of saving lives. In his pocket, he still carried the metal tag labeled Henderson, Captain's Locker. He turned it over in his fingers. The edges were sharp. It felt like holding the truth itself, small, cold, and dangerous. Back inside, Mark lay awake, staring at the ceiling tiles. His pulse steady now, but his mind far from peace. He whispered to himself, barely audible, "Some fires never end. They just change rooms." And in the next room, Dr. Ethan Clark realized, this hospital wasn't a place of healing tonight. It was a crime scene wrapped in white sheets. The hospital had its own rhythm after midnight, a kind of breathing made of machines, distant footsteps, and muted voices behind curtains. The world outside was asleep, but inside St. David's, two men were wide awake, haunted by a truth too heavy for daylight. Dr. Ethan Clark stood outside room 314 for a long time before entering. He'd done this for years, watched patients fight for their lives, confess their regrets, take their last breaths. But tonight felt different. This wasn't about death. It was about the cost of living with what you've done. Mark sat by the window, a shadow in blue hospital light. His bandaged hands rested on his lap, still trembling from the therapy session earlier. The rain had returned, tapping softly against the glass. Steady, rhythmic, like a confession waiting to be said. Ethan closed the door behind him. "You shouldn't be out of bed," he said quietly. Mark didn't turn. "I've had worse nights." "I don't doubt that," Ethan replied, walking closer. "But this isn't one of your fires, Captain. You can't keep standing in the smoke hoping it'll clear." Mark gave a tired laugh. "You sound like my therapist." "I'm not your therapist," Ethan said. "I'm the one who found gasoline residue on your boots." Silence. The kind that pulls the air out of the room. Mark's jaw tightened. He didn't look away from the window. "Then you already know." "I know enough to ask," Ethan said. "You lied in your report. You covered something up. Why?" Mark's throat moved as he swallowed, eyes fixed on the rain. "Because the truth would have burned everything that was left." Ethan stepped closer. "You mean Claire?" Mark's eyes flickered. "She doesn't deserve to carry his sins. She's buried enough." The heart monitor clicked steadily, its sound suddenly unbearable. Ethan crossed his arms, fighting between duty and compassion. "You altered an investigation. That's obstruction, Captain. It could destroy your career, your reputation." Mark finally turned to face him. "My reputation already died in that fire. You can't kill what's already ash." Ethan took a deep breath. "So what was it really? Insurance fraud? Desperation? Why did he do it?" Mark's voice cracked. "Debt. He was drowning in it. Said it was just property, just a building. No one would be inside." He pressed his bandaged hands together. "I told him no, but by the time I found him that night, it was too late. The fumes had built up, one spark, and he was gone." For a long moment, Ethan said nothing. He looked at the man sitting before him, a rescuer who couldn't save the one person he needed to. "You took the blame," Ethan said finally. "I took the silence," Mark corrected. "Sometimes that's worse." The monitors hummed softly between them. Outside, the thunder rolled again, faint but constant. Ethan felt something shift inside him, the kind of pull that happens when logic meets empathy and neither one wins. "I could report this," Ethan said, voice low. "I know," Mark replied. "But tell me, Doctor, what does it fix?" "He's gone. She's alone. The truth won't bring anyone back." Ethan's jaw clenched. "The truth still matters." "Does it?" Mark asked, eyes steady. "Or does it just make the survivors bleed slower?" Ethan stared at him, the weight of those words sinking deep. He thought of all the truths he'd told families in this hospital. Truths that shattered them. Truths that never healed anyone. Maybe Mark was right. Maybe sometimes mercy was louder than honesty. Mark's breathing grew shallow. The effort of speaking had drained him. "Please," he said softly. "Let her believe he died a hero. Let me live with the lie." Ethan turned away, pressing a hand to his face. The storm outside cracked lightning across the sky, casting flickers of light through the blinds. For a moment, both men stood suspended between duty and forgiveness. Finally, Ethan said quietly, "You're not the only one who'll have to live with it." Mark looked up, eyes wet. "Then I guess we're both burned now." The doctor walked out without another word, his reflection ghosting across the glass door. Behind him, the heart monitor kept beeping, slow and steady. A heartbeat that sounded too much like guilt. In the hallway, Ethan stopped by the nurses' station. The city lights glowed faintly through the rain-streaked windows. He wrote something quick in the chart, just one line: "Patient stable, psychological evaluation recommended." But what he didn't write was the truth, that Captain Mark Reynolds was healing everywhere except where it mattered most. And as Ethan turned off the hallway light, he knew the fire was still burning. Only now, it lived in both of them. The rain outside hadn't stopped for 3 days. The hospital felt heavier because of it. The air damp, the windows fogged, the corridors too quiet. Every storm seemed to echo that one night, the one Mark Reynolds could never escape. Detective Harris returned on a grey morning, his coat still wet from the weather. He walked into Dr. Ethan Clark's office carrying a manila folder, eyes sharp and tired. "Doctor," he said flatly, "we need to speak to your patient again." Ethan's heart sank. "He's not ready." Harris ignored him. "He's awake, he's coherent, and he's the last person who saw Lieutenant Henderson alive. We'll keep it short." In room 314, Mark sat up in bed. Oxygen tubing still wrapped around his face, the white sheet drawn tight over his legs. He looked smaller now, thinner, like the fire had stolen more than skin. When the detective entered, Mark didn't flinch. He'd been waiting for this. "Captain Reynolds," Harris said, pulling up a chair. "We found inconsistencies in the scene report. The accelerant traces, the ignition point. You sure you told us everything?" Mark's voice was steady, but his eyes flickered. "I told you what happened. Your partner's widow said you were the last one to see him. Anything you want to add?" Silence. The hum of the oxygen machine filled the space between their words. Ethan stood near the corner, pretending to check vitals, but every nerve in his body was wired tight. Mark's breathing quickened. His pulse monitor spiked. "Captain," Harris pressed, "was there an argument before the fire?" Mark's hands gripped the sheet. "You don't understand. Try me." The tension snapped. Mark's heart rate surged, alarms shrieking. His chest seized, body trembling under the strain. Nurses rushed in as Harris stepped back, startled. "Doctor!" one of them shouted. "He's in cardiac arrhythmia!" Ethan moved fast, orders cutting through the chaos. "Epinephrine now! Charge to 200! Clear!" The defibrillator pads pressed to Mark's chest. His body jolted, the monitor flatlining for a heartbeat that felt eternal. "Again," Ethan said. "Clear!" The second shock hit, a long, piercing tone, then a faint blip, another, and another. The beeping returned, slow but steady. Ethan exhaled shakily. The nurses adjusted tubes, stabilized IVs. Detective Harris stood by the wall, shaken but silent. As the room emptied, Ethan leaned against the counter, catching his breath. Then he saw it. A small envelope on the bedside table, half hidden beneath a folded blanket. His name was written on it in trembling ink. Dr. Clark. He hesitated, glancing toward the unconscious man. The machines kept their rhythm, indifferent to human decisions. Finally, Ethan opened it. Inside was a single handwritten page. "If you're reading this, I didn't make it. Paul caused the fire. I tried to stop him. He didn't want to die. Neither of us did. Don't tell Claire. Let her keep the man she loved. Let the truth die with me." "Mark." Ethan's eyes blurred. His throat tightened as he folded the letter back into the envelope. The storm outside rumbled like a memory refusing to fade. When Harris returned hours later, Ethan met him at the door. "He's stable," the doctor said, voice calm, too calm. The detective sighed. "Good. Maybe next time he can finish his story." Ethan nodded, but his hand slipped into his pocket, where the envelope now rested. "Maybe next time," he said quietly. The detective left. The door clicked shut behind him. Ethan stood there for a long time, staring at the rain through the blinds. In every drop, he saw the same thing: reflection, distortion, truth, and mercy bleeding into each other. Later that night, Claire Henderson arrived with a thermos of coffee and trembling hands. She thanked Ethan for saving Mark's life, unaware of the letter sitting inches away in his coat pocket. "He still blames himself," she said softly. "But Paul, he was a good man." Ethan looked at her, the lie heavy in his chest. "He was lucky to have a friend like Mark," he said. She smiled faintly, wiping a tear. "I think they saved each other, in their own way." When she left, Ethan returned to Mark's bedside. The man slept peacefully, his breathing shallow, but steady. Ethan placed the envelope in the drawer beside him. He whispered, "You saved her too, Captain. Even if she'll never know." Outside, thunder rolled again, distant, echoing, softer this time. And in that sound, Dr. Ethan Clark made his decision. Some truths don't heal. Some fires shouldn't be relit. The storm finally ended 3 days later. Sunlight slipped through the blinds of St. David's Hospital for the first time in weeks, painting the sterile walls in soft gold. The city outside moved on, sirens replaced by birds, chaos replaced by calm. But inside, something still burned. Not fire, but memory. Captain Mark Reynolds sat on the edge of his hospital bed, staring at his reflection in the glass. The scars were healing, pink and uneven, a map of everything he'd survived. His hands trembled as he tried to button the clean shirt the nurse had left for him. It wasn't the pain that slowed him. It was the weight of everything that hadn't been said. Dr. Ethan Clark entered quietly. "You're leaving us," he said, trying to smile. Mark looked up, forcing a nod. "Guess it's time." Ethan checked his vitals, his chart, all the things doctors check when they can't touch the truth. "You'll need follow-ups," he said. "Your lungs will take months to recover." Mark gave a weak laugh. "Yeah, breathing's never been my strong suit." They stood in silence for a moment, two men who had shared too much without ever saying the most important thing. "I wanted to thank you," Mark said at last. "Not just for saving my life, for everything else." Ethan looked at him, eyes steady. "You don't owe me thanks, Captain." "Still," Mark said, "you could have told them. You didn't." Ethan paused. "Some things don't belong in reports." Mark nodded slowly, understanding what the doctor wasn't saying. He picked up his jacket, the one that still smelled faintly of smoke, and slid it over his shoulder. The movement was slow, painful, deliberate. He reached for the cane beside the bed and stood. As he walked toward the door, Ethan asked softly, "What will you do now?" Mark hesitated. "Find something worth saving that isn't on fire." Ethan smiled faintly. "That's a good place to start." The elevator doors closed behind Mark, and for a long moment, Ethan stood in the empty hallway, staring at the fading reflection of the man he'd just let go. In his pocket, the envelope still rested. The confession no one would ever read. Outside, the world looked new. Claire Henderson sat on a bench in the hospital courtyard, her hands clasped around a small bouquet of lilies. When Mark stepped out, she stood. Their eyes met. No words, no explanations, just the heavy understanding of two people who'd lost the same man in different ways. She handed him one of the flowers. "He'd be proud," she whispered. Mark took it, voice barely audible. "I hope so." And for the first time since the fire, he let the silence be enough. From the window above, Dr. Ethan Clark watched as Mark limped away through the sunlight. The rain had washed everything clean. The streets, the sky, maybe even a few souls. He turned back to the ward, where monitors still beeped and lives still hung in the balance. Medicine was full of fire, he thought. Not the kind that burned buildings, but the kind that burned quietly inside the people who survived. He opened the envelope one last time, reading the words again. Then, without hesitation, he tore it into pieces and dropped them into the biohazard bin. "Rest now," he whispered. "Let it die here." The pieces fluttered down like ashes. The narration faded in, calm and reflective. Some fires destroy, others reveal, but the hardest ones to put out are the ones that never leave a mark. Sometimes, mercy burns slower than truth. A faint heartbeat echoed. A single note of piano rose behind it, soft, unresolved, fading into quiet. Then the voice of the narrator returned. "If you believe that some truths deserve silence, like this story, leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and tell us where you're listening from. Because behind every hospital door, there's a story still burning." The sound of the heart monitor pulsed once more. Steady, alive, fading into black.